Imagine, if you will, humanity's biggest turning point. I mean, the moment we stopped just chasing our food and actually started growing it. For generations, the story of how agriculture began seemed pretty straightforward, a clear narrative we all kind of learn. But what if that story, well, what if it's only part of the picture? What if the very first steps towards farming, the literal seeds of cultivation, were scattered much wider and maybe even earlier than we ever thought? Today, we're taking a deep dive into some really groundbreaking research, stuff that fundamentally recalibrates our understanding of how agriculture really began. We're heading, mentally at least, far from the traditional cradle of civilization to a place that's now revealing its own, frankly incredible, ancient secrets. Our mission: to explore these findings from a site called Toda Cave in Uzbekistan. We want to understand how they're challenging those long-held assumptions about the shift from foraging to farming, and importantly, what this all means for the bigger human story. You're definitely in for some surprises today. Okay, so let's start with what we thought we knew, the standard narrative, right? For a long time, our sources remind us the story about agriculture's beginnings really centered on the Neolithic period. This huge leap for human culture. It changed everything, diets, societies, the lot.
Right. And typically when we talked about key crops, wheat, barley, legumes, our minds just jump straight to the Fertile Crescent.
That's the classic story.
Exactly. That's where the Natufians, maybe 10,000 years ago or so, were credited with harvesting wild grains.
Yeah.
Setting the stage, supposedly, for farming proper. It was often seen as this single pivotal moment in one specific place.
Yeah. And that's where this new research really throws a fascinating curveball, as you said.
Yep.
It's published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it reveals something quite different. It shows that by at least 9,200 years ago, people way over in southern Uzbekistan, so much further north and east.
Oh, that far.
Yeah. They were also actively harvesting wild barley. And critically, they were using sophisticated tools, things like sickle blades.
Okay, sickles are a big deal in this context, right? They really are. They're often linked directly with, early agricultural practices elsewhere, intensive plant gathering and processing. So this isn't just some random isolated find. It strongly suggests that these kinds of cultural developments, the stepping stones towards agriculture, were actually far more widespread than we recognized.
Wow.
It directly challenges that idea of cultivation starting in just one region, maybe as a response to population pressure or climate change. It implies things were, more diverse, more distributed.
That really does shift the mental map of early human innovation, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Makes you wonder about connections, or maybe parallel developments across huge distances.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's zoom in then. Let's dig into the actual evidence from Toda Cave. What did they find? This was a big international effort, I understand.
Yes, a major collaboration, led by Xinying Zhou in Beijing and supervised by Farhad Maksudov in Samarkand. Their excavations in the Surkandarya Valley, specifically in Toda Cave, they went deep into the oldest layers, and they unearthed these incredible clues, a real window into a past we're only just starting to properly understand.
So what kind of clues? What's the hard evidence?
Well, they recovered quite an impressive array. Stone tools, charcoal for dating, and really critically abundant plant remains.
Plant remains, okay. Like what?
So the archaeobotanical work, led by Robert Spengler, confirmed they were actively collecting wild barley. That's Hordeum vulgaris subspecies spontaneum, the wild ancestor.
And the dating is solid.
Oh yeah, remarkably precise. They directly dated the oldest barley seeds themselves. They fall between roughly 9,100 and 8,600 calibrated years before present. We often say Dickhole, BP.
Okay, so over 9,000 years ago.
Definitely. And it wasn't just barley. They found other really significant plant remains too. Things like wild pistachio shells, Pistacia vera, and wild apple seeds.
A lot of apples.
Seems like it. Or a very close relative. Plus other nuts and even wild rice grass, Piptatherum.
That's amazing. It pushes back our understanding of when people started using those plants too, right?
By millennia, yes. For the apple and pistachio in Central Asia, it's at least 4,000 years earlier than we previously knew.
And the tools. You mentioned sickles.
Right. The stone tools, mostly blades and flakes, made from local limestone, showed really clear use-wear patterns under the microscope. Patterns that indicated they were used for cutting grasses or other plant material, very similar to finds from known agricultural sites in the Fertile Crescent.
So the wear patterns match up.
They do, and importantly, they also found grinding stones.
Ah, so not just cutting, but processing too.
Exactly. Just these plant foods weren't just casually collected, they were being systematically processed for consumption.
And connecting this back. What was life like for these people at Toda Cave? What period are we talking about culturally?
Well, the earliest occupation layers, where this evidence comes from, date between 9,200 and 7,800 Cal BP. And significantly, these layers were aceramic.
Meaning no pottery.
No pottery found.
Yeah.
Which is a strong indicator of a pre-pottery Neolithic culture, putting it in a very early phase. And they use this multi-proxy approach, lots of different scientific methods. Pollen analysis, soil chemistry.
Right, getting the full picture.
Exactly. It gives us this really clear, detailed view of a region and a time period that, frankly, hasn't been studied that much. You can almost picture them, can't you? Working these sickles, grinding these wild grains, maybe watching the seasons, understanding these plants, much like people were doing potentially thousands of kilometers away in the Levant.
So it really feels like this discovery isn't just about finding barley in Uzbekistan. It's about what it implies for human behavior across this massive interconnected region of Eurasia.
Precisely.
It paints a much more, nuanced picture, a more complex journey towards agriculture than the old story allowed for.
Absolutely. It really challenges that idea of a single aha moment of invention.
Yeah.
Like Xinying Zhou, the lead author, said, this discovery should change the way that scientists think about the transition from foraging to farming, as it shows how widespread the transitional behaviors were.
Transitional behaviors. I like that phrase.
And Robert Spengler added something interesting, too. He said, these ancient hunters and foragers were already tied into the cultural practices that would lead to the origins of agriculture, which supports this view that maybe domestication wasn't always, a deliberate, intentional act by humans at first.
More like a gradual process.
Exactly. More of a protracted process. Maybe a series of mutualistic relationships building up between people and plants. Think of it less like a sudden invention and more like a slow, evolving dance between humans and their environment.
A dance.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating way to put it.
Yeah.
So the Toda Cave data fundamentally expands the map then. The known geographic area where people were harvesting wild cereals. It strongly suggests this behavior was, widely implemented, not just locked into the Levant or the Eastern Mediterranean.
No, it stretches deep into Central Asia.
Right.
And the landscape itself probably played a big part in that. The paleoclimate data, the pollen, and so on. It shows that back in the early Holocene, that valley, the Surkandarya Valley, would have been covered in shrubby woodland seasonal grass fields.
So similar environments.
Very similar, ecologically speaking, to the hilly flanks of the Zagros Mountains or parts of the Fertile Crescent, prime territory for wild barley.
Okay.
So these ecological similarities might have helped people spread, or at least helped similar economic practices or ideas spread, people figuring out how to best use the resources around them.
And as you mentioned, it also gives us the earliest evidence for using things like wild apples and pistachios in Central Asia, pushing that timeline back by 4,000 years.
At least 4 millennia, yeah. It's
Yeah.
quite a jump.
So this raises a really important question for archaeologists, doesn't it? What does this do to our neat cultural boxes, our labels?
That's a really key point. It forces a reassessment of those traditional archaeological cultural names, like the Celt Keminar or Hissar cultures, often associated with later periods or different areas in Central Asia. The material from Toda Cave, this evidence for harvesting, it actually predates some of those cultures and extends the known geographic range for these kinds of behaviors.
So our previous categories might have been too narrow, or maybe just didn't capture this earlier phase.
Potentially, yes. It implies there might have been this broader, older tradition of making these tiny stone blades, microliths, specifically for composite tools like sickles, a tradition that spanned a much wider region than we'd accounted for.
Getting this clearer picture of the cultural backdrop, the context for these huge evolutionary changes, it feels essential.
It's truly essential, yes, for understanding our current economic systems, even our genetic makeup as humans today. It's not just ancient history. It connects directly to the choices and adaptations made thousands of years ago, shaping everything from our diets to our DNA.
Wow. What an absolutely eye-opening deep dive. It really reshapes our understanding of, one of humanity's most pivotal moments. It just shows, doesn't it? History is never static. There's always more to learn, always more to uncover when we look closely, when we find new evidence like this.
Indeed.
So we move from the story of a single origin point for agriculture to evidence suggesting a much broader, more complex, maybe more drawn-out process, this intricate interaction between humans and plants across huge swaths of Eurasia.
That's the picture emerging now.
And the people of Toda Cave, with their sickles and their grinding stones. They weren't just some outlier group. They were part of this diverse, widespread movement interacting with their environment in ways that ultimately led us right here to where we are today.
Precisely. And getting that clearer picture of the cultural backdrop, as we said, it's crucial for understanding how we got here. But it also leaves us with a really thought-provoking idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, go on.
Well, think about it. If wild grain harvesting, using tools like sickles, was actually practiced across much of West and Central Asia, including Toda Cave, yet the definitive traits of plant domestication, the genetic changes that mark true farming, seem to have primarily evolved later, or perhaps more intensely, in the Fertile Crescent and the Eastern Mediterranean,
Okay.
then maybe there was some other factor involved, something beyond just using sickle blades that drove that final evolutionary shift towards domestication in certain areas, but not others.
Huh. Like what, potentially?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What could that crucial differentiating factor have been? Was it a subtle difference in how people managed the plants? Different environmental pressures? Maybe specific social structures? What does that missing piece tell us about the really deep, complex connection between humans and the plants that ultimately shaped our entire civilization? It suggests the path to farming wasn't just about having the tools, but maybe something more nuanced about how or why they were used, fostering that truly transformative, codependent relationship. It leaves a lot to think about.